bring in Joseph Ochieno, who's an East Africa political analyst, and he's live from the Ugandan capital, Kampala. Welcome to you, Joseph. I'd like to carry on with that point, I think, because I've heard it said many times by different analysts that actually both sides have treated the civilians in the country in Sudan abysmally at times. Would an ascending Sudanese army mean a better future for the people of the country or not?
I think the Sudanese people simply need peace. If you ask me, and I think if you ask the vast majority of the Sudanese people, at par, the majority of them would say they don't welcome either of them and that they would like a civilian government, ideally freely, democratically elected by the majority of the people of Sudan. That is what they lack. Having said that, and having gotten rid of the other dictatorship by the Sudanese military, of course, as you know, the rapid support services emerged out of an extreme of the mainstream army that had brutally killed, particularly targeting communities, particularly around Darfur, and which surprised many people that these guys gained grounds and nearly took over. So from that perspective, then, the majority of the Sudanese people would possibly have a sense of relief that the official Sudanese army is slightly the better of the two devils, and particularly because it also carries a psychological edge that's the national army versus a militia that had been propped up by a rather ruthless military regime.
I mean, the conflict's been going now, and as we said, now we're into several years of conflict, great suffering from the people there. In terms of how you get to the peace that they would want, what will be the quickest route? Will it be one side defeating the other? Is that going to bring peace faster than any other forms of diplomacy or outside intervention?
It's a really difficult question for me, but of course I get your point. Quite clearly, it's an irony, isn't it, that what the Sudanese authorities are celebrating is the head of state, returning to his, official residence after 2 years, and returning to the official capital after nearly 2 years. So that is really something which is much more shambolic than anything. But that said, really, it tells you that, well, there's been a deadlock, and I'm not quite sure how fast the advancement of the official Sudanese army might be, and particularly how Darfur might pan out in the next week or so. That, I think, is going to determine whether or not these two sides come to a negotiated settlement of some sort. Quite clearly, I think that's what's required in Sudan, that the two sides come together for a settlement of some sort. That said, where are the regional bodies and where are their voices? Where is the continental body and where are their voices? And who is saying no to Egypt and who's saying no particularly to the United Arab Emirates? And if you go into the strategic details, the details possibly not even about territory. It's not even about strategic national security for any of the backers of these military organizations, but effectively minerals, which is effectively gold, which is something which is open up there. That, I think, is a major tragedy that in the world we should allow this to happen. But of course, if you look at the guys who these people are looking up to, possibly the atrocities being committed in Gaza, including this season of Ramadan, this season of Lent for Christians, it's really a shambolic new world in which we see continuous atrocities by, if you like, organized military, but the diplomatic, line seems to be rather weak.
Joseph, just one quick question, if I may, about the suffering of the people, because for me that's the thing that hits home more than anything. It was said to me a year ago that people there are on the verge of what is the biggest famine on the planet, and I can't imagine an extra year of civil war has improved things. How bad are things?
That is the worry, and to say that hardly 1 week ago, both sides were accusing the other of again targeting civilians away from basically basic needs of ordinary people. People suffering out of famine, people suffering from lack of basic supplies and foodstuffs is terrible enough. But for people to be targeted knowingly by military forces who actually use human beings, ordinary civilians, as human shields is terrible. But away from Khartoum, remember, Sudan has been suffering quietly, silently in the last 20 or so years. And we've got friends and colleagues from that country who are spread around the world, massively decent professionals, But the stories they tell you out of their own families in the last 20 years or so, before even this year, war emerged, particularly in places like Darfur, which you and others have very well attempted to report and to expose to the rest of the world in the last few years, is extraordinary. So no, it's a very worrying situation. But as I said in my earlier point, almost deliberately, that if you see what's happening in the Sudan, and if you see what's happening, in the new Sudan, meaning South Sudan, and if you see what's happening in DR Congo, which we're not covering, and then of course link it to the unacceptable atrocities in Gaza, you say, where is the world in 2025? I think there is a need for some kind of invocation of the conscious, or for global citizens, global powers, particularly powerful men and women who control this world, to let us know whether or not they're really, really part of the world community. And those are the guys who control big nation powers, and they know themselves, including those other powers who are fueling these wars, including some of those whom we can find even here in my own native Kampala.
Joseph, thank you. Joseph Ochieno, East Africa political analyst, is my guest.
Thank you.